Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A friend of mine had a question. He asked, in some African cultures, it is known that if there's a couple and they have zina, they engage in fornication outside of marriage, they're not married. After, if they want to get married, they're not able to. It is haram for them to marry one another. So is this an Islamic thing, or is this something that is purely cultural? So I answered him in very brief, in a few words. If you want to hear the answer, you can forward, inshallah. There are timestamps. You can go to the end where I answer the question. However, I was thinking about where does this understanding come from? And my mind took me to a particular verse in the Quran. In Surah al-Nūr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He states, الزاني لا ينكح إلا زانية أو مشركة. The zani, the male fornicator, who is a Muslim, he will only marry the zaniya, the woman who engages in fornication. Or he will marry an idolatress, a woman who is a mushrik, not a Muslim. وَالزَّانِيَةُ, and the adulteress, لَا يَنْكِحُهَا إِلَّا زَانٍ أَوْ مُشْرِكٍ. The adulteress is only to marry an adulterer or an idolater. وَحُرِّمَ ذَلِكَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Such behavior is forbidden, it is haram for the believers. So in this verse, the clear words of the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if a man has zina with a woman, a man who engages in zina will only marry a woman who engages in zina. Or he'll marry a mushrik, a woman who is a polytheist. The other way is also true. If there is a zaniya, a Muslim woman who does zina, who fornicates, she will only be married by a man who does zina himself, or the man himself doesn't have iman, he's a mushrik. And this type of behavior, getting married to people who do zina, this is haram for the believers. So it seems that from this verse, this understanding came that it is haram for the believers to marry someone who's done zina. And some people may have taken this really far and said that if someone commits zina, they can no longer get married. No other Muslim person can get married to that person except for another person who's done zina. As for the particular question, that seems to be an offshoot from that, because the question is not directly correlated with this ayah. As the question says, if there was a couple who did zina, can they get married afterward or not to one another? And I will answer that in the end. Now, I want to first talk about this particular verse just because it is very important, and now many people might have this question, and especially in today's time where there are a lot of haram relationships happening. First of all, we need to protect ourselves. We need to be true to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We need to be strong believers and prevent ourselves from fulfilling our desires in a haram way. And the best method for this is to get married as soon as possible. Unfortunately, many families, many fathers and mothers do not want to allow their children to get married early. They're thinking about how are they going to provide, how are they going to lead a family, etc. But in reality, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, if someone comes, an eligible suitor for your daughter comes and you deny them, then there's going to be a lot of fitna and fasad. There's going to be a lot of corruption on earth. So we need to look at the harms of not getting our children married. And we also, if it is our own selves that we don't want to get married yet, but we want to engage in a haram relationship, we need to think about the harms of this. It's definitely destroying our iman in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so it's definitely not worth it. Anyway, coming back to the topic, I wanted to share what Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah states in his tafsir about this particular verse. There are 6 different opinions that he highlights. I'm going to give you the gist of them, inshallah. He says the first opinion is that this verse that says that a fornicator only marries a fornicatress or an adulteress, if fornicatress is not a word. It says here, Ibn Abbas's understanding of this verse is that the word nikah actually means zina, or it actually means jima', intercourse. So the actual literal meaning of nikah means intercourse. And the reason it's used for marriage is because marriage is the halal means towards intercourse. So lughatan, literally, the word nikah means intercourse. So he says here the word la yankih, it is not to be understood as marriage. It's to be understood as jima', intercourse. So it means that a zani, a man who is engaged in fornication, the person that he is having consensual relations with is also doing fornication. Obviously, if a man is engaged in fornication, the woman that he is having fornication with is also fornicating. And it is saying that this action does not behoove the believers. So it seems that the person that he is having fornication with is either a Muslima who is also a fornicator, meaning very low in their akhlaq at that time, or even worse than that, they are a mushrika. That is essentially the first understanding that Imam al-Qurtubi presents to us. And he also gives a hadith, etc. In that verse. I urge anyone who understands Arabic to read this tafsir in Imam al-Qurtubi's tafsir of this under verse number 3 in Surah al-Nūr. The second opinion that he gives is he shares a hadith that is narrated by Abu Dawud and at-Tirmidhi, narrated by Amr bin Shu'aib from his father, from his grandfather, that Marthad bin Abi Marthad, he used to bring prisoners to Mecca. In Mecca, there was a woman, her name was Anāq, right? So Anāq was a fornicator, she was an adulteress, she was a prostitute, right? It says she was baghi. So baghi means she was a prostitute. So Marthad bin Abi Marthad, he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, Ya Rasulullah, ankihu Anāq, can I marry Anāq? Can I marry this woman? And it says that she was his sadiqa, she was his friend in times of old. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was quiet. He didn't respond. Then this verse was revealed. وَالزَّانِيَةُ لَا يَنْكِحُهَا إِلَّا زَانٍ أَوْ مُشْرِكٍ. The zaniya in this context is Anāq. She is only to be married by someone who does zina or a mushrik, a polytheist. So it says in the hadith, and the person, Marthad, he is the actual narrator, he says, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam called me and he recited this ayah to me and he said, do not marry Anāq. Imam al-Khattabi, he says, هذا خاص بهذه المرأة إذ كانت كافرة. This ayah is specific to Anāq and Marthad because she is a kafira and she is a baghi. فأما الزانية المسلمة فإن العقد عليها لا يفسخ. Imam al-Khattabi, he says, a zaniya, a fornicator, that is a Muslima, a Muslim woman, if you were to get married with her, that does not break the nikah. Imam al-Khattabi says it does not break the nikah if a Muslim man marries a woman who has done zina before. That doesn't break it. That is the second point that Imam al-Qurtubi brings out of 6 that I'm going to share with you. Number 3, Imam al-Qurtubi says, أنها مخصوصة في رجل من المسلمين أيضا. He says there's another story that some have narrated regarding this ayah. He says there's a particular Muslim that this is about. It's not for everyone. This person came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He wanted to get married to a woman called Mahzul, and she was among those who do zina. Mahzul used to engage in zina. She was a either a prostitute. It says min baghaya zaniyat. Mahzul, she said that you must spend money on me. Sharatat an tunfiqa alayh. If you want to get married to me, you have to spend a lot of money on me. This verse was revealed, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told this Sahabi, don't get married to this woman. So this is narrated by Amr bin Asi and Mujahid. Number 4 out of 6. This is another story regarding the ayah. And it's possible that the ayah is revealed for multiple occasions. It applies to every incident. It states here that the al-Ṣuffah, these were some people in Medina. They did not have any money. They didn't have any shelter. They would stay in the masjid on the raised platform in Masjid Nabawi. Some of them would go out, they would ask people for food, they would try to find work, etc. It was very difficult for them. Some found that there are some women, some prostitutes, who have a lot of wealth. They were prostitutes at that time, they had some wealth. And they saw that they have a lot of food, a lot of clothing. They wanted permission to get married to these women so that they could have some food and clothing. This verse was revealed and it completely said that it is not allowed for you to marry these specific prostitutes. Now that was khas for those individuals. It is specific for al-Ṣuffah. They could not marry these prostitutes. Now does it apply elsewhere? The ulama, they say no, it does not apply elsewhere. Number 5. This is mentioned by Az-Zajjaj and others who narrate from Al-Hasan. It says that the meaning here is, and this number 5 is actually what some people take. It's the more extreme view. It's a narration that says that a zani is the one that has been punished for doing zina, and the zaniya in the verse is the one that has been punished for doing zina. It's called mahdud. So the ayah actually means that a person who has been caught doing zina is only allowed to marry a woman who has been caught doing zina. So that's the 5th interpretation. Actually, if a woman has been caught doing zina, she cannot marry anyone but a man who's been caught doing zina. Imam Ibn al-Arabi, he says, this is incorrect in terms of its meaning as well as the narration. He says, وَهَذَا مَعْنًى لَا يَصِحُ نَظَرًا كَمَا لَمْ يَثْبُتْ نَقْلًا. The meaning of this view is incorrect, and then the narration, the chain of narration is corrupt. So we cannot even say that this has been established towards Al-Hasan, that this was Al-Hasan al-Basri's view at all. The chain of narration is corrupt. Then there's a Shafi'i scholar, Imam Ilkiya. He says that this was the view of some mutaakhir Shafi'iyah. Some Shafi'i scholars of the latter age, they had this view that if someone did zina, they could not marry anyone but a woman that did zina as well. And if they got married, if a man that did zina, a fornicator, got married to a woman who was not a fornicator, this woman never did fornication, the judge would break them up. So Ilkiya, he narrates this from some Shafi'iyah, but then he objects. He says this is not the correct madhab at all. He says, okay, if you want to take the literal meaning of the verse, right? Because here they're taking the literal meaning of the verse. He says, then take the literal meaning of the second half of the verse, that the zani, he can marry a zaniya and he can marry a mushrika. Right, the verse says that a zani, someone who does fornication, he should only marry a woman that does fornication, or he should marry a mushrik. But nowhere in the laws of Islam is it allowed for a Muslim man who has done fornication to be able to marry an idolatress. It's haram. You cannot marry a person that is a mushrik, a Hindu or whatever. They worship idols. Absolutely impermissible. And no one says this. Even those scholars who say that this ayah is to be taken literally, they also don't agree with it. So Imam Ilkiya, he says that you're completely wrong. So this view is wrong, essentially. The narration towards Al-Hasan is wrong. And if you were to be consistent in your methodology to extract this rule, then you would come out with a rule that doesn't make sense at all, that a Muslim man can marry a mushrik and a Muslim woman can marry a mushrik man. No Muslim says this. And the last one is that this verse used to apply, and then it became mansukh. It became abrogated. Abrogation means that this ruling used to apply, now it doesn't apply anymore. So it says here that this is a narration from Imam Malik. He narrates from Yahya ibn Sa'id, from Sa'id ibn al-Musayyab. He says, الزاني لا ينكح إلا زانية أو مشركة والزانية لا ينكحها إلا زان أو مشرك نسخت هذه الآية التي بعدها وأنكحوا الأيام منكم. This verse used to apply. It used to be that if a Muslim man did zina, he could only marry a Muslim woman who did zina, or he could marry a mushrik. That's all. That was a punishment for doing zina. However, this was abrogated. The ruling of the verse has been removed. Now, we only recite it in the Quran. We don't apply the ruling of the verse. And he says the verse that has abrogated it is verse number 32 of Surah al-Nūr itself. وَأَنكِحُوا الْأَيَامَ مِنكُمْ. The verse says, get the Muslim women amongst you married. And the fornicators amongst Muslim women are Muslim women. So it means even the fornicators among you, get them married to Muslim men, etc. So these are the different views in that regard. To summarize, the correct view in this regard regarding the ayah is that the ayah is not supposed to be taken literally. Or if the ayah was to be taken literally, the ruling no longer applies. It has become abrogated. So the answer, the brother asked me if there are a couple, these are Muslims, they did not get married and they've had fornication. Can they get married? The answer is yes, they can get married. Actually, many ulama suggest that they should get married. They've already had a relationship. It is good that they get married. Now, can these two individuals, if they wanted to, get married to other people? Yes, they can. If they do tawbah, and they have to do tawbah for this. It is mandatory to do tawbah from fornication, from zina. It's a major sin. We have to, if anyone has done this, they have to do tawbah. And if that girl, that zania, former zania, she does tawbah, she repents, she can get married to a chaste man, a man who's never engaged in fornication. And that brother who was engaged in zina, he does tawbah, he repents, turns back to Allah, he can get married to a virgin woman that's never engaged in intercourse or zina as well. So that is completely allowed in Islam. I hope that answers the question. جزاك الله خيرا وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى على خير خلق محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If there's any questions that you may have, you can leave it down in the comments and inshallah I will try to respond to those.